My stepbrother insisted that I leave the house during my stepfather's burial, believing it was his until the will revealed otherwise. 38-year-old Jake never imagined I would be getting ready for the burial of my stepfather. Memories sweep back like a tidal wave as I sit here organizing old pictures and planning. Death seems to cause one to consider a lifetime of events, both positive and negative. At 9 years old, my mother Sarah married Richard, my stepfather. The wedding day seems to me like yesterday. Mom looked lovely in her basic white outfit, hope beaming in her eyes for a fresh start. Richard, on the other hand, seemed to be stressing his austere attitude by wearing a black suit. Even on what ought to have been a happy occasion, he insisted on a solemn demeanor that I would come to know all too well over the years. Richard was a rigid man right from the beginning, particularly when he turned to face me. He always seemed to be permanently frowning. Often, I questioned whether he simply had the means to relate to a child who wasn't his own, or if he harbored resentment at having to assume the position of stepfather. Growing up with Richard was not easy. From my grades to my wardrobe to even how I handled my fork at meals, he attacked everything I did. You need to work harder, or this cruel world will chew you up and spit you out, he said almost daily. Looking back, I wonder if Dad was attempting to equip me for life in his own flawed manner, even if at the time I believed he was just being nasty. His rigidity permeated every sphere of our life. I had to sit up straight, use the proper fork, and only spoke when spoken to during family get-togethers. Any departure from his expectations was greeted with a stinging stare or a harsh correction. Family vacations, which ought to have been light-hearted and leisurely, were more like military drills than pleasure excursions. Richard would schedule everything down to the last minute. Heaven help us should we stray from the plan. One vacation I recall, we missed a turn and arrived at a museum 15 minutes late. For the rest of the day, Richard was in a terrible mood, grumbling about lost time and inadequate preparation. Everything changed 3 years following the wedding when my stepbrother Michael was born. Richard suddenly had his own son, and it was obviously clear whose favorite he was. He poured love and compliments on Michael. Richard's smile was unlike anything I'd seen until he held his newborn kid. It revealed a part of Richard the first never knew existed. Like a switch had been turned on, I was envious and furious. When I was 12 years old, I couldn't comprehend why Michael received all the love and attention while I just got harsh looks and criticism. The difference was clear and agonizing. Michael's achievements, no matter how little, were honored with great celebration, even if they were notable. My own successes were greeted with a nod and a remark on how I can improve next time. Mom would try to reassure me when I protested to her about the unfair treatment. Richard loves you too, Jake, she would say, her eyes begging me to understand. That's just rough love. He wants you ready for the world. Still, it didn't feel like love to me. It seemed like continual disappointment. As Richard saw me always failing, our family dynamic changed in ways I never would have predicted. Throughout the years, Mom became ill at 25, and we all gathered around her. Richard stayed stoic even then, but I sensed compassion when he felt nobody else was looking. When Mom thought I wasn't in the room, I would observe him softly changing her pillows or cradling her hand. It was the first time I understood that Richard's lack of affection could have been more a result of his personal constraints than of his sentiments for us. 2 years later, Mom passed away, and it felt as though the glue keeping our family intact had broken. Tears and quiet prayers defined the funeral. Richard stood like a monument all through the service, his face a blank mask, though the wall between us seemed some indication of approval from the guy who had been my father figure for most of my life. Looking after Richard in his latter years was difficult. Fighting the restrictions his aging body placed on him, he was as tenacious and critical as always. There were days when our conflict was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but occasionally, too, I felt short sparks of thanks in his eyes, like the time I stayed up all night with him during a sick attack, or when I learned to make his preferred foods as he grew too frail to stand at the stove himself. Those were uncommon events, though, and most of the time I felt as though I was looking after a stranger who happened to live in my house. We were living in a tense truce, neither of us entirely sure how to close the distance that had widened between us over the years. Richard's character made me never even consider entering a relationship or getting married. I wanted none of the same issues I was experiencing for my wife or girlfriend to confront. Richard's gone at 65, taken unexpectedly in the evening from a heart attack. Everyone is showing their respect as I get ready for his burial. Michael arrived with Emma and their children, Lily 5 years old and Max 3 years old. I hadn't seen him in years until now. Though he seems older and more austere, I recall from our early years that he exudes entitlement about everything. The funeral was a depressing event. I stood there listening to people talk about Richard, a fantastic man who always placed family first, a pillar of the community, and I wanted to find fun in the irony of it all. Knowing the same man I did. Did they, too? The Richard they described seemed to be a stranger? Michael drew me aside as folks were farting. Once it was all over, I considered that perhaps he wished to assist each other in our sadness, to reconnect or to share memories of our childhood. Rather, he delivered a startling blow that left me whirling. So, about the house, he said, his voice laid back as though we were talking about the temperature. I'll need you to leave by the end of the month. Not sure. I glanced at him. What are you talking about? He groaned and cast an intentionally obtuse glance at me. Clearly, the house. Dad turned it over to me ultimately. I am his genuine son. You never imagined he would leave it to you. I thought of myself as having been gut-pounded. This was how it turned out. All these years of trying to be the son Richard wanted and of looking after him. Part of me wanted to fight for what I felt I had earned over years of conscientious living. But another side of me, the one still feeling like that 9-year-old lad yearning for affirmation, wanted to withdraw. Fine, I answered, my voice empty. I'll be out by the end of the month, not only for Richard, but for the family I never really had, for the bond I had always hoped would grow between Richard and me, but never did. As I watched Michael walk away, arm around Emma, kids running ahead, that evening I began packing. Among boxes of memories I wasn't sure I wanted to save, sorting through years of accumulated belongings. I couldn't help but wonder whether Richard had been right all along. Sometimes, you still ended up with nothing to show for it. The world was harsh. Update. I sold out of my childhood house a week ago. For now, Mom's sister Linda is here with me, trying to decide what to do next. Thinking about Michael and how we got here, I lie awake at night staring at the foreign ceiling. Michael obviously was the preferred child growing up. Richard doted on him in a way he never did with me, from the time he was born. Michael was around 8 years old. Richard hired a whole arcade for his buddies and himself. At the time, I was 17 and couldn't help but contrast it with my own birthdays, which often featured a quiet meal and perhaps a small gift. But Michael aged, and something changed. The sweet little lad who used to follow me about, wanting to play, developed into a depressed adolescent who appeared to hate everything and everyone. He started to treat me like I was invisible and spoke angrily back to our parents. It was like seeing a stranger seize my little brother's body. One specific occasion comes to mind when he was around 16. Richard asked us about his marks when we were having dinner. Richard asked us both this kind of inquiry all the time. It was a regular one. Michael burst this time, though. He began screaming about how he despised living under Richard's control and how sick he felt of the pressure. He bolted from the house, slamming the door so fiercely a picture fell from the wall. Richard seemed to be sitting there, looking older and sadder than I had ever seen him. Instead of the angry man I had anticipated to pursue Michael and drag back, Michael's behavior just became worse as he grew older. He began courting a series of girls, each relationship ending. Haley, late nights, missing curfews, and shouting battles with Richard that rocked the home abound. I tried to keep out of it, but the continual stress would inevitably affect me. Michael laughed it off when Richard tried to discuss respect and duty. "You can't control me anymore," he would say, and Richard would get this expression, a mix of wrath and despair that I had never seen before. Then arrived the day he turned up with Emma as his bride. Not even among us knew he was seeing someone seriously, let alone getting ready for marriage. Walking in with Emma, little more than a teenager herself, he said they had eloped. I shall never forget Richard's expression. For once, he was silent. Mom tried to calm things down and welcome Emma into the family, but the air was clearly charged. Richard seemed to be straining to keep his cool and to find the proper words to speak to his kid. Emma claimed she wanted to live free from family meddling apart. Michael thus packed his luggage and left. Simply as that, he pledged to visit and keep in touch. But those pledges soon dropped off the list. Weeks became months devoid of his communication. His calls were always quick and often tinged with conflict. I assumed definitely he would come back when Mom fell ill, but he did not. He asked her periodically how she was doing, but always had a reason for why he couldn't visit. Work was hectic, the kids were sick, the car was in the shop. Something was always there, hoping it would be Michael. I recall sitting next to Mom's hospital bed and seeing her eyes flash every time the phone rang. More usually than not, it wasn't. It was me who had to phone Mom to let her know she died. He sounded very offended, full of regret for not visiting more frequently. He claimed he would try to make it to the funeral, but ultimately, he did not show up. Just a flower arrangement delivered to the funeral house, accompanied by a card offering his sympathies. Feeling his absence like a physical hurt, I stood at the burial, wondering how we had become so far apart. And right now, here we are, not motivated by love or obligation. The prodigal son returns for what he can gain. Thinking about how he swooped in and grabbed the house, acting as though he had some right to do so when he had left us years earlier, makes me enraged. I consider all the evenings I spent seeing to Richard, all the doctor's visits I accompanied, all the meals I made, and all the expenses I paid, and for what? To be thrown aside. Just like I never really mattered at all. But my phone calls, as I'm staggered in these terrible ideas, it is Mr. Thompson, Richard's attorney, telling me he has to talk about something vital. He sounds serious and asks me to come back to the house tomorrow. Uncertain on what to believe. Part of me hopes there's a mistake and maybe I won't have to abandon my house after all. Knowing how let down I have been in the past, another side of me is terrified to hope. I wonder what tomorrow will hold as I hang up the phone. Whatever it is, I am clear on one thing. This is not going to be easy. I toss and turn the remainder of the night, my head ablaze with possibilities. Something so crucial that Mr. Thompson had to see me personally. Richard left something for me after all. Is it conceivable? Alternatively, is this only another letdown in a long run of disappointments? Feeling like a stranger, I stood before my childhood house the next day. To my astonishment, Michael's car was also in the driveway already. Breathing deeply, I entered. The familiar creak of the front door sent a pulse through me. Sitting at the dining room table, Mr. Thompson had a stack of documents before him. There were Michael and Emma as well, clearly agitated. With his demeanor unreadable, the attorney motioned for me to sit down. Well aware of the tension in the room, Mr. Thompson said, "Thank you all for coming," his voice firm, businesslike. "I know this is a tough period, but there are some crucial issues about Richard's will we should talk about." Michael slanted forward, a smug grin on his face. "Let's wrap this up. I would want to start right away, as I have plans for this home." Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, seeming uncomfortable. "We should really talk about that. Richard's will states that Jake has been left the house, and in fact, all of his possessions." The room went still for a time. I felt as though I couldn't breathe. Had I heard him precisely? After all these years of believing I was never good enough, Richard had left everything to me. The first to react was Michael. "What?" he yelled, leaping to his feet so fast his chair dropped backward. "That's not possible. Real son of his father is me." He wouldn't hand everything to Jake. Mr. Thompson stayed cool under Michael's rage. I'm rather worried. It's rather obvious. Richards will specifically says that Jake is to inherit all of his possessions, including the house, his savings, and his personal items. What I was hearing defied belief. It seemed illogical. Those years of criticism, of feeling as though I could never measure up, and now this. Michael was pacing now, his face flushed with rage. This is nuts. When he composed this, he must have been insane. I'll dispute it. I'll bring this before court. Mr. Thompson gave a headshake. That is not what I would counsel. Richard prepared this will rather carefully. He included a letter outlining his choice and had it attested and notarized. Challenging effectively would be quite difficult. Michael turned to face me, his eyes flaming with resentment. You did this, did not you? You somehow twisted him against me. Still in disbelief, I raised my hands. I know nothing. I assumed he was forwarding everything to you. Before things could get much more heated, Mr. Thompson stepped in. If I may, I think Richard's letter might help to clarify his choice. Pulling out an envelope, he started to read. To my sons, should you be reading this? I am gone. Though I hope I can clarify. I know you two may find my choice shocking. I have made lots of mistakes over my life. Among my largest was not treating both of my sons equally in terms of love. I expected too much from Jake, was too demanding, never showed enough affection, and I treated Michael too kindly. I never set appropriate limits or imparted any lessons of value. As I considered my life in my last years, I came to see something crucial. A real son is defined by behavior rather than blood. And in that sense, Jake behaved as a real son ought to. He stayed with me through trying circumstances and looked after me even when I didn't deserve it. All the traits I attempted to teach but failed to show myself patience, kindness, and responsibility he exhibited. I am so leaving everything to him, not as a punishment to Michael, but rather as a tribute to the kid who really embodied the ideals I cherish. I hope you both have the compassion to see and pardon the errors of an elderly guy. The room went still once Mr. Thompson closed his book. Tears came to me, a lifetime of feelings rising inside me. All those years I felt Richard didn't care, that he considered me a disappointment, but he had been observing, noting, valuing in his own unique sense. Michael froze momentarily, his face a mask of shock and rage. Then he silently seized Emma's hand, rushed out, and slammed the door behind him. His automobile started up and ran out of the driveway. The last act of disobedience was a screech. Turning to me, Mr. Thompson wore a gentle grin. I know this is a lot to absorb, Jake, he continued. Richard expressed his preferences quite precisely. He wished for you a safe future, free from financial concerns. I nodded, still not sure I understood exactly what had transpired. Thank you, I managed to say. I need some time to consider all this. Mr. Thompson stopped as he neatly folded his documents. There is still one more item. Your stepfather left you a personal note as well. You read it in private, he questioned. He gave me an envelope with my name written in Richard's recognizable handwriting on it. I took it, knowing that within our words, I had waited a lifetime to hear. With shaky hands, I sat by myself in the quiet house, flipping the envelope in my hands after Mr. Thompson departed. At last, I plucked the seal to open it and read. Jake, dear, though I know I've never been excellent at communicating my emotions, hopefully, this letter will help to offset some of my faults. I'm glad of the man you have evolved into. Though I failed as a parent, I had a challenging upbringing and never taught appropriate affectionate behavior. I reasoned that the best way to equip you for life was to be rigorous and challenge you. I regret the suffering I caused you. Now I understand I was mistaken, particularly in these last several years. Your compassion and commitment have shown me what actual strength and integrity look like. You now, more than ever, reflect the guy I always dreamed you would be. I apologize for not telling you these things when I was living. With my last wishes and this letter, Maybe you will have some peace and protection. Remember yourself, son. You are deserving of all the joy available. Love. Richard. Tears came down my face as I closed the book. All those years of feeling inadequate, of thinking Richard didn't care, and now this was overpowering. Over the next days, I battled to make sense of everything. Once a cause of stress and bad memories, the house felt different now. It belonged to me in a deeper sense. As much as legally, it was evidence of Richard's affection, sincere, though spoken to late. Michael hasn't gotten in touch since he departed that day. Not sure whether he will, though I know it will take time. Part of me hopes we can reconcile someday. The pain is still raw, and our distance seems more than it did years ago. I have given family, the complexity of love, and the numerous ways people show it a lot of thought. Though often harsh, Richard's love was sincere. It was flawed, in his own sense. He was working to equip me for life and build my resilience. Though I wish he could have discovered a softer approach, I now better understand him. Regarding inheritance, it goes beyond just money and real estate. One has responsibility. Richard trusted me to continue on his legacy and to live the ideals he loved. Although it's difficult work, I'm resolved to meet expectations. I have chosen to create a scholarship fund in Richard's name from a portion of the bequest. It's for children from difficult situations, so they may have the education and chances they might otherwise miss. Taking the teachings he imparted on me and paying them forward seems like the proper approach to honor his memory. I'm still trying to make sense of everything as I sit here now in the house that turned unexpectedly into mine. Fathers and sons have a complex relationship marked by frequently unsaid feelings and misunderstandings. Richard and I never had the relationship I wanted when he was alive, but his last act has given me an opportunity to better know him, to see the love always there, buried under the surface. I wish Dad had told me these things during his lifetime. We could have had talks, cleared the air, perhaps even created the relationship I so yearned for. But life does not always provide us tidy ends or flawless closure. Right now, I'm concentrating on respecting Richard's memory by practicing the ideals he sought to inculcate in me. Work hard, be conscientious, and, most importantly, love those who matter. I'm glad to be carrying on a legacy. Looking ahead, I experience a range of emotions: sadness for what was lost, thankfulness for what I have, and hope for what is to come. Richard's unexpected legacy has given me a fresh perspective of family, love, and forgiveness, in addition to financial stability. Though I never expected it, this is a new chapter in my life, and I am ready to face it, bearing with me the lessons of the past and hope for a better future. That might ultimately be the best inheritance of all. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. 7 years after my husband caught me cheating with my boss and went to prison for assault. He's out now. I'm alone, and my kids hate me. I'm a selfish person. Or so tell myself practically every night when I hear the silence in my home. My children aren't here. My ex-husband hates me for good cause. My immediate family is fractured, and I've never stopped hating myself for what I did. My selfish conduct occurred in 2015. I had just reached 39, and I admit that I took my ex-husband for granted. My ex told me every day that I was beautiful, that he wanted to be intimate with me, that he cared for me, and that he treated me as an equal. He never regarded me as a queen or princess. I was his partner. We'd been married for 20 years, by that point high school sweethearts and each other's only, and it seemed right. My family adored him, my brother looked up to him, and my ex supported him through many difficult moments. My ex was the person people contacted when they were in difficulties, and he assisted them. He was a good guy. Over the years, I have given him 2 strong boys. At the time of this narrative, they were 18 and 16. And we had twin girls who were 13 years old. I had gained weight and felt self-conscious, but he still called me lovely. Our fights were rare and far between. We discussed everything, but when we disagreed, It was typically over sex or a lack thereof on my part, as well as the things I refused to do in bed. It wasn't that I didn't want to do things. It was just that I wasn't in the mood, which he understood. When I turned 39, my birthday celebration unveiled the new me. I had spent the entire year in the gym, doing yoga and Pilates. My efforts helped me lose 180 pounds and reach 135, which was an incredible transformation for me. I had always been a plump girl, so having a tight, fit figure was a new sensation for me. My ex-husband also went to the gym with me, albeit not as frequently, but he dropped from 260 pounds to 225 and began to shape his physique. My ex-husband could not keep his hands off of me, but I was still not in the mood. He certainly made an effort. We attended dinners, danced, and went for regular walks. He always helped around the house, and I could see in his eyes how much he adored and lusted after me. After 20 years together, he still gazed at me with passion. I believe any woman would desire that, but I wasn't in the mood at the time. He suggested couple counseling, but I refused. So, my selfishness comes into play. A new manager began working in my office a few days after my birthday. He was significantly younger and more attractive, and for some reason, he was interested in me. Initially, I ignored him. Then it switched from ignoring to casual chatting. He flirted. So I showed him my ring. However, after 2 months of relentless flirtation, I reciprocated, which led to me telling him about my life and finding myself thinking about him more and more. This was an emotional affair, as I now realize, but I was high at the time. My ex-husband suspected something was wrong with me. We had a furious dispute over it, which I feel I began. He moved to kiss me, and I subconsciously produced a horrified expression. It wasn't directed at my ex. I was thinking about another man as my husband leaned in, and I was dissatisfied with the whole situation. At least, that is what I tell myself. A week later, I asked the new boss to meet me in a cafe so we could discuss. I was about to beg him to leave me alone and that I couldn't do this, but he kissed me first, and my thoughts went blank. That marked the beginning of our 6-month affair. During that period, I did things with this man that my ex-husband had long desired. I was more enthusiastic, willing, and usually in the mood. I think it was because it was something new. During this time, my ex and I continued to have sex, albeit less regularly. I started pushing him away, nitpicking his minor habits, and even criticizing him. I'm ashamed of how I handled him at the time. I only understood what I was doing when my brother came to visit and informed me that my ex had confided in him. My ex was despondent and contemplating divorce, claiming that he no longer loved me and that he was beginning to lose interest in me. That brought me out of it, so I immediately called it off, quit my job, and promised myself that I would make my husband feel loved and cherished. I was going to change this. If possible, I would be a better wife. My affair partner arrived at my residence with a package of office supplies for my desk, which I had ordered to be shipped. We spoke. He wanted to know what he had done wrong, and I told him I needed to work on my marriage. I told him to leave, but he wanted one final chance. I told him no, but he begged and pleaded, and like a fool, I gave in. We went into the guest room and started fighting. I'm not sure how long we were doing this, but when he was on top of me, I felt him violently snap back, and there was a huge crash. I sat up, and my ex looked at me. My affair partner was on the floor, and there was a big hole in the wall. I tried to talk to my ex, but his eyes were bloodshot. His lips trembled as tears streamed down his cheeks. I could tell he was in a lot of agony, and I felt disgusted. I witnessed my affair partner stand up and try to leave. My ex looked at him, and my AP told him that if he knew what was best for him, he'd back off. So, my ex assaulted him. I yelled and cried for my ex to stop. Desperate, I jumped on his back, causing me to be slammed to the ground. Everything became blurry for a time. Sentences sounded muffled, but when I awoke, my ex had my AP by his side and was on the phone. All I could do was stare at my AP's injured face and the blood and teeth on the floor next to him. There was a loud bang on the door, and I saw my ex put the phone on speaker, carefully set it on the floor, drop to his knees, and place his hands on the back of his head. The door opened, and the police entered and handcuffed him. Paramedics came shortly later. I quickly found that he had phoned 911 himself. At the hospital, everything went terribly wrong. My father didn't say anything to me. He just stared at me with shame. My brother was yelling at me, looking upset and questioning how I could have done that to my ex. My mother was comforting me, telling me everything will be fine, which prompted my father to yell at her. His family was infuriated. His sisters threatened me, and his parents seemed to wish to put me to an early grave. I approached my children, but they refused to speak with me. My sons wouldn't even look at me. My AP was severely damaged and required reconstructive surgery on his face. My ex had nearly crushed it at the hospital. A woman entered my room and immediately attacked me. My brother grabbed her away from me, and it turned out she was my AP's wife. I didn't realize he was married. He never wore a ring and never said anything. It made me feel even worse. Prior to the trial, my boys stayed with their grandparents on my husband's side, while my girls refused to speak with me. My ex did not want to see me either. I attempted to visit him at the county jail, but was forbidden. My brother made sure my ex went to the correct CAL facility where he worked so he could monitor him. When I requested my brother to deliver a message for me, he told me to go to hell. During the trial, I saw my ex for the first time in months. He gazed at me with rage, and it hurt more than I could have imagined. He had always looked at me with love. Even while we were fighting, he always looked at me with love, but throughout the trial, it was hatred. I had to excuse myself for crying in the restroom. As the days passed, I was compelled to recount my affair in full for everyone to hear. When I informed them how long it had lasted, my ex looked devastated, and my father stood up and exited the courtroom. During my ex's testimony, I discovered that he had returned home to surprise me with lunch and a weekend trip for two to the Catskills. He had planned a romantic retreat, but as we walked in, he responded. He claimed that when the AP told him to step aside, he snapped and pummeled him, stopping only after he flung me off his back. He instantly called 911, and we heard the recording in court. Hearing the misery in his voice and sobbing as he did everything the operator told him to do was heartbreaking. The AP couldn't speak verbally and was extremely drugged, so they utilized photographs of him, which made me sick because I was to blame for everything. My ex broke his eye socket, cheekbones, and jaw. They claimed they were bone fragments that were too small to piece together. My ex was charged with a third-degree felony and sentenced to 7 years in prison, causing my kids to yell and protest, as well as my girls and his family to let out a howl that still haunts me today. The first 3 months were terrible. My AP's soon-to-be ex-wife sued me for affection-based alienation. My ex has filed for divorce. My eldest son has moved out. My other kid remained in his room, and my twins were rebelling fiercely. My ex-sister-in-law attacked me in the middle of Price Chopper when I tried to apologize to his mother. She spat in my face. My father and brother refused to speak with me. Eventually, I needed to locate a new job. There was no money coming in, and I nearly depleted my funds, but I was essentially blacklisted in my sector. It was negative publicity for the accounting firm, so I started working in retail and became a seasonal hander block adjuster during the tax season. I almost lost my house. My ex refused to let me visit him, and each letter I sent was returned. Crying in the shower became practically a daily habit. My parents almost split up because my mother was continually defending me. My brother refused to accept me, and my pals, whom I'd known since elementary school, were divided. I soon began to have ideas of terminating things, of packing my goods and going. The guilt was so heavy. I eventually saw a therapist who admonished me for being too familiar with my ex. I no longer considered him a spouse. Instead, I saw him as a friend with perks, and I treated him accordingly. I did, and she was right. I became too comfortable with him. I regarded him as a comrade, but he saw me as his wife, the mother of his children, the woman he adored and wanted. I took him for granted. Almost a year passed, and my children remained silent. When I served dinner, they would take their meal and disappear to their rooms, not even looking at me. I had a few meltdowns, imploring them to say anything to me, but nothing happened. My brother was married, and I was not invited, but my children were. I continued to try to visit my ex, hoping that he had put me on the visitor list, but I was always turned down. My letters were still getting returned. It left me terribly depressed, and I felt I deserved it. Then, unexpectedly, my brother showed up. I was both surprised and pleased to see him, as it was the first time he had visited my house since the trial. He just came to reprimand me, informing me that my ex was in the hospital after being stabbed. An inmate attempted to sexually abuse him in his cell, which resulted in my ex being stabbed in the stomach and the inmate's spine breaking. My brother yelled at me, "You did this," before returning to his truck. I grieved for days thereafter because he was correct. I did this. I attempted to visit my ex in the infirmary but was forbidden for more years. I tried to communicate with him and continued to write letters, but they were returned. Fortunately, our children visited their father frequently, which is how I heard he had been placed in protective custody by my brother after the attack. My eldest son graduated from the same college as my ex and majored in the same field. He only called his siblings. He never wanted to talk to me. He never comes to our place for the holidays, only to his grandparents. My other son followed suit, attending the same institution and refusing to call me. My twins were difficult to deal with, but they went to see their father once a week, which helped them feel better. When they became too disobedient, their uncle would punish them. But my brother and I continued to communicate sparingly. I tried to visit his wife after they had their first child, but I was ordered to leave. My mother kept me updated on their life, but my father still refused to acknowledge me. Then, at the start of May this year, my children were joyful, and my sons returned home. I had no idea why, and it didn't matter. They were home for 4 months. My children were present, and I tried everything I could to express my regret, but I was mostly ignored. Still, they were talking to me, and it made me very glad to have a conversation with them and learn about their life. My eldest had been dating a woman for over a year. My second-born was on a college track team, and my girls started talking to me again. I hated myself even more for what I had done to them. It was wonderful to see them smiling, joking, and eating supper together again. At the end of August, I was preparing for the twins' first day of senior year, which also coincided with their 18th birthday. I conveyed my enthusiasm for their birthday party and told them what I planned to accomplish. My girls immediately asked if we could reschedule. This confused me because I believed we were improving. When I inquired why, one of them explained, "Because Dad is throwing us a party, and I don't want you near him." That comment stunned me. I asked when their father was released, and they claimed he was let out at the end of April for good behavior. I cried because he was gone, and it shattered me even more. They were more present because he was gone. They felt better and more cheery now that their father was back in their lives. It wasn't because we were beginning to recover. They had him back. When I questioned where he was staying, they told me he was with my brother. I tried calling. I needed to speak with him, but he refused. I attempted going over, holding all the letters that had been returned throughout the years, and I caught a glimpse of him through the crack in the door. I called his name, but my brother told me to leave. I handed him the letters and departed. When I reached the driveway, I heard his voice. When I turned around, he was walking toward me. I immediately started crying and rushed to hug him, but he returned my letters. "You forgot this," he coldly told me. I cried as he walked away. I begged and pleaded for him to talk to me, but he simply walked back into the home. My children stood outside the entrance, staring at me with no love in their eyes. At that point, I knew my children were simply tolerating me. However, I still want to prove it. I'd like to tell them how selfish I was. I want to tell him how much I miss him and how sorry I am for destroying what we had. So, I'm still trying to go through my daily existence. My mother informed me that my AP's ex-wife began seeing my ex 2 years ago and has been returning to see him. I don't really care. All I want is for him to forgive me. I want him to speak to me. I want him to be with me. I want him to look at me like he used to. I want my kids to be with us. I really want my family back, but I know I do not deserve it. Even if we miraculously reunite, it will never be the same. I was selfish, and I wish I could take it back. My son's response. This is a response to my mother's post entitled "My Selfishness Ruined My Family." I'm a frequent Reddit user. Therefore, I'm using a throwaway since I don't want anyone in my social circle to know this is me. I try to keep my past a secret. My college buddies are unaware that my father is in prison, and I don't want to inform them. So, as I strolled around campus, I overheard others talking about and sharing this post, which brought back a lot of emotions I'd been working to overcome. I looked it up and found enough evidence to conclude it was about my family, which enraged me. I reached out to my mother, and as usual, tears flowed. I yelled at her when I went to visit my father and told him what I did. He yelled at me as well, but he is a wonderful man. He just yelled at me for cussing. He always tells me that even if I don't love my mother, I should respect her. But it is difficult to appreciate someone like her. My father has always battled. He would instill in us the importance of being grateful for growing up in a community where we would not be attacked for obtaining excellent marks or reading books. He informed us that where he grew up, children were bullied for seeking white things, such as attending college. He described how difficult it was for him in the South Bronx. My aunts informed us that when he was 13, he joined a gang so that he could be left alone at school. When he was 15, his father died of cancer, and my father had to be a surrogate parent to his 2 sisters due to a lack of life insurance. He worked and did anything he could to help pay the rent and put food on the table. All while still attending school, my father felt it was lucky that his mother remarried a wonderful man and relocated to upstate New York for a better lifestyle. My uncle informed me that when they first met my father, they thought he was peculiar. It was the 1990s, and when my father strolled into school wearing baggy trousers and a Puerto Rican flag shirt, they decided to tease him. My uncle said they weren't expecting my father to fight back, but he did. He kicked their asses instead of walking away. My father helped him up and offered if he wanted to skip school, share a 40, and talk things over. My uncle remarked that when my father did that, he knew they'd be buddies, and they soon started hanging out. That's when my father introduced him to my mother, and they hit it off. They attended the same college and got married by the end of their first year. Growing up, my parents were always in a romantic relationship. They were always holding hands and kissing, which was quite humiliating, even at the beginning of my senior year when everything went wrong. My father treated my mother as if she were a teenager. He loved and appreciated her. I can honestly tell that he never put her on a pedestal. He would lecture me that a woman will not respect a man who puts her on a pedestal. When I questioned why, he responded, "Because she always be looking down on you." My father informed me that both his father and stepfather shared the same philosophy: treat your wife as an equal. She is your greatest friend and confidant, just as you are hers. My father had his idiosyncrasies. He was a large guy who was always joking, 5 feet 11, 260 pounds, and despite his weight, he was highly active. I used to enjoy it when he sang to my mother. We all did. He'd serenade her, buy her flowers, and sign the card, because it's Thursday, and I was thinking about you. He occasionally wrote her love letters and defended her honor when she was treated rudely or disrespectfully. He frequently complimented her on her beauty. My father demonstrated to the daughters the type of man they should have in their lives. My father was always there for my uncle, even when everyone else believed he was a lost cause. My father never gave up on him, and as my grandfather once stated, he knocked the stupid out of him and left behind the man he was supposed to be. That sentence has always made me laugh. My father showed me how a guy, a friend, and a husband should act. Prior to her affair, my mother had always adored my father. He was constantly supportive and encouraging. He was her one-man pep rally when she was feeling low, and she was his. They had the marriage that we all wanted. Then my mother messed it up. I recall those months when she spoke to my father as if he were beneath her. He pushed back but controlled himself. Even though my father was a college graduate and a successful financial consultant, he could go from zero to ghetto in 5 seconds. Grandma described him as being similar to his father. Nice, respectable, and helpful, but willing to cut your neck out with his bare hands. My father tried everything, buying her flowers, taking her out to dinner, and dancing. But she was in her own little world and mistreated him. We all witnessed it. It had a significant impact on my brother and twin sisters, but my father smiled and assured us that everything would work out. He would add that Mom was probably stressed out at work and bringing it home. I believed it, especially after she quit her job. I honestly believed it was her employment that was the issue. Then my father was arrested? Mom, do you know how embarrassed we felt when the entire school was discussing what happened? My father got detained because my mother couldn't close her legs. I couldn't bear looking at you, so I went to stay at Grandma's place. The sight of you repulsed me. When I visited Dad, he couldn't bear to look at me. He was embarrassed. He told me he had failed as a husband and a man. I told him he didn't, but he said he did, since a man would have considered the repercussions of his actions before doing anything so idiotic. He said he failed as a husband because his wife had cheated on him with another man. I implored him to please look at me, but he refused. Then you had the nerve to seek our forgiveness, and for the first time in my life, I wanted to physically harm you. We were all hurting, and you asked for forgiveness. Sitting in that trial and listening to that 911 call was the worst 25 minutes of my life. 25 minutes of listening to my father, who would have murdered and died for you, crying and imploring the operator for assistance, telling the woman that he thought he had killed someone, and again stating the love of my life cheated on me. It harmed us more than anything. I understand you attempted to act as a character witness for Dad. We all told you not to do it, but you did anyway. Why did you want to show us that you still loved him? Tell the court that he is a good man because, in my opinion, the cross-examination in which you informed everyone how long you had been with that son of a was the reason we lost him and sent him to jail. I believe if we had an actual lawyer rather than an appointed one, he would have walked ... As a result, I experienced anger issues. My brother became a secret alcoholic. One of the twins was suicidal and you were unaware. All you wanted was to attempt to work things out with Dad, leaving me to support my siblings. I loathed you in certain ways. I still do. When I got to college, I had no desire to associate with you. Like my father, I had to be a surrogate parent to my siblings. I was working full-time, attending college, and giving you money to help pay the bills. I'm not sure why you made it appear like you were doing it alone. Mom, I know it was difficult. I know you were depressed, but you got aid with your finances and Grandma defended you. But Mom only did it because everyone was against you, or so the twins believe. When Dad was stabbed, I nearly had a mental breakdown. I'd just seen him that day. I was making fun of how muscular he had become, and we had a nice chuckle about what Dad dubbed the prison body plan. He made it sound like a funny commercial. I was almost back to school when I received the phone call. I almost crashed the car because my brain shut down. It was difficult for everybody. I didn't tell anyone, but I sat outside the scumbag's flat. I wanted to beat him up so severely, but when I saw him walking with that cane, I remembered Dad's words and drove away. As the years passed, Grandma died, followed by Grandpa a few days later from broken heart syndrome, and Dad was unable to attend the burial. Did you know that both of his sisters married in the waiting room so he could give them away? The harm you've caused to all of us is immense. It didn't help that you continued asking us for forgiveness and another chance. You never gave us room to understand or heal. You just kept asking, and all I saw was your desire to make yourself feel better. You did not give a damn. You did not try. You merely gave us room and pretended that we were expected to act normally again? Yes, you tried later, but not when it was most crucial. When Dad came out, he told us to start talking to you. He stated you were a good mother to us and that we should treat you with respect. So, we did. It made you happy for a while. I remembered what it was like to not despise you. Dad struggled to find work at first, but one of his old clients eventually hired him. I did not anticipate the twins to spring that bomb on you. Dad didn't want you to know he was gone. So, when you appeared, it disturbed him. He threw up after speaking with you. He stated the sight of you made him nauseous. Regarding your statement in your post about your ex-wife coming to see Dad, she has been seeing him weekly for over 3 years, and they have spent time together since he was released. So please don't build a castle in the sky about the two of you getting back together. Call me if you want to discuss this. Call me if you want to fix things with your children. What you did last week, posting what is perhaps the worst time of our lives, is sheer selfishness. As your title implies, I told Dad about it, but he didn't care. He claimed you were only the mother of his children. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.